Okay.
You're listening to CreepGeeks Podcast. So it begins again. Welcome back to the CreepGeeks Podcast. This is Season 6, Episode 253.
Beware the Appalachian Fae Folk. How to protect from the fairies.
Yeah. All right, so here we are again. I'm Greg.
I'm Omi.
And this is the CreepGeeks Podcast, and we talk about all sorts of stuff that we find to be interesting, and that's kind of what we do. So we like to do paranormal and weird news. And we also go out and do investigations and have weird experiences, and we'd like to talk about them, and we do all sorts of neat stuff. Sometimes we do more stuff than others. It's become, it's just kind of a thing in between work and life and, all that stuff. So, now here recently in the mountains of western North Carolina, part of Appalachia, if you will, it has been super rainy, as most places it seems to have been really rainy. And there has been a proliferance. Is that the right word? Proliferance?
No.
There's been a bunch of mushrooms that keep showing up, and Omi keeps going out and taking pictures, and she's been putting them on her Instagram page.
Yeah.
You can tell them what it is.
So it's omi.salavea on Instagram, or you can go on Facebook and do Omi Salavea Ordinary Hiker.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you can see pictures of interesting mushrooms. And kind of growing up in Virginia and basically living in North Carolina and all that stuff for the past 40, 50 years for me, and 12, 13, how long? 32 years for you. We know that mushrooms mean something or can mean something, and it becomes all part of the allure of the Appalachians, and beware the fairy.
Well,
the Faerie Fae Folk.
Whether it's like a European folklore or American folklore, a lot of us grew up knowing you're not supposed to step inside the fairy ring.
Yeah, but why?
Because,
I'll tell you.
Okay.
Yeah, see, this is where you do that sometimes. Try to set it up, and then you just take it away. It's like, well, all right, well, we're done. Taking away the allure.
Okay.
Although,
why?
I'll tell you when we get into the podcast so that people listen more than 2 minutes and 36 seconds of the podcast. I have a timer. I see stuff. Mm-hmm. So anywho, moving back into the podcast, a lot of stuff that we got to talk about. But this is one of those things that since it has been so much rain everywhere, and it's been raining, it seems like for at least two weeks, like every day it seems.
Yeah.
And it's caused a lot of mushrooms to pop up. Some of them get huge. So it's just been kind of a crazy thing. And every time I see them, I think about a couple different things. But one of the things is like the Faerie Fae and the Fae Folk and all that, and the legends and lore. And, it seems like particularly if you have like a Scottish or an Irish background or even like a European background, you know about it. But also if you're native or indigenous, you have it. And it's kind of one of the things that we wanted to talk about. So we'll kind of roll into that. But a couple things we'd like to cover. There's a couple different ways you can get a hold of us and contact us if you'd like to do so. One of the easiest ways to get a hold of us, just go to Facebook.
Yep.
Because we do have a Facebook page. It's called CreepGeeks, right? You can look that up. It's pretty easy.
The Facebook page is CreepGeeks Podcast, or you can find our Facebook group, which is fairly lively, but we'd like more people to join up.
Sure.
And seriously, just type CreepGeeks Facebook group.
That's the easy way to do it, yeah.
We are also on Instagram and TikTok. I've been putting some more content out there on TikTok, so check that out too.
Yeah, we have a toll-free number that you can call if you'd like to leave us a message or share a story or anything like that. It's called, what do we call that phone number?
Toll-free voicemail inbox.
No, but you know how like some groups have like contact line or
we just call it a phone
spooky number. I know, but we should give it a name.
No.
I don't know. Anyway.
Anyways, you can reach us by calling 575-208-4025. Just leave a message or share your story on that line, and we might play it on the show.
Yes. Very nice. All right. So a couple things that we do when we roll into the podcast is because one person asked a while ago, and we've been saying this like past 10 episodes, and asked us what we're going to have for dinner after we do the podcast, because that's typically what we do is we'll do the podcast and then have something for dinner, nice little dinner.
Yeah.
Because I think that's important to maintain my fatitude, right? We don't have one. No dinner for us. It's to be decided.
It's to be decided. Because
last time it was like one of the ones I remember was because we didn't have it when we got done. Was homemade chicken salad and peasant bread.
Yeah. Well, it's to be decided today because this is going to be one of the few days I have off because we've got back-to-back stuff that we do in our everyday lives. And this is going to be the day where we eat a nice dinner, but we also run all our errands, maybe do some grocery shopping, and also do the podcast.
She's super excited.
So
I dread every bit of that.
I'm not excited. I'm excited to get it done efficiently and quickly. That's what I'm excited
That's
about.
what she said, everybody. So the Faerie, Fae, and the Fae Folk, we're talking about things like elves, brownies. They all have different names. That's the thing. And depending on where you're looking and what you're trying to look into, you might find like trolls and all sorts of crazy stuff that sort of fall into that.
Elves, fairies, gnomes, trolls,
elementals,
nymphs, dryads,
water sprites, dryads,
yeah.
triads.
Yeah.
Is it triad?
Dryad.
Oh, I said
a triad is way something
That's
else.
isn't that like China and Japan or something like that? So, where we live in North Carolina, we do have the Appalachian Mountains, and it gets pretty deep and it's pretty dark. And the thing about that is that it's sort of been closed off for a long time. The people are suspicious and all that sort of thing. And if this goes way, way back,
insular.
Well, whatever, man. Don't politically correct me because that's garbage, right? Because it's true. They had no trusting. They did not trust.
Yeah.
And that's the way it's been for a long time. Now, even in the year 2022, it's still kind of like that in some spots, but it gets pretty remote and way back in there. And it seems like here recently, with all the TikTok trends and everything else going on, there's been a lot of like things you do and you don't do in Appalachia, right?
Yeah.
If you hear something whistle in the woods, don't whistle back. Don't whistle at night. And, it's funny because with that sort of thing, it sort of ties into, is this sort of the European influence from people that came in from Ireland and Scotland and other places and moved into the mountains?
Yeah.
Or is it something else? Because the natives have the same sort of belief.
Yeah, because we heard...
Don't whistle,
we heard
right? Especially
whistle.
at night.
Yeah, we heard the whistle thing in New Mexico. You're not supposed to whistle either.
Right, but it was here too.
And it was more of a Hispanic Latinx folklore, which again goes back to European folklore. So hearing it in New Mexico.
Well, I think the Spanish got it from the natives because you don't summon spirits that way because you can summon a spirit.
Yeah, that's true. So
well, they don't really call them spirits or necessarily like, haints or whatever in Appalachia, but it's sort of the same thing. It seemed like with them, you're not really summoning a spirit per se. You're summoning something that may be in the woods that you don't want. Same thing if you hear help out in the woods, you don't answer back. If you hear your name, no, you didn't.
Yeah.
Don't look in the trees. Like if you're, walking and hiking in the woods, don't look in the trees. And there's been reports of people are saying that, they do long hikes and stuff like that. And it can be, or the one I read that kind of gave me the creeps was the person was hiking and they were followed for hours by a witch. Mm-hmm. And they would see it out of the corner of their eyes behind them and they would never, it's like, don't look back. Did you see that? No, you didn't. Keep going. Don't look over your shoulder. Don't look in the trees. Never look in the trees. Just this crazy stuff.
Yeah. Did you see that meme in a lot of the paranormal groups this week about talking to hikers, which I've been doing for a while, talking to hikers for paranormal content because they'll tell you things like being followed by a witch.
And don't follow the river for a while. There's all sorts of like this spooky stuff, which is kind of weird. But what I did really think about it is like it sort of ties in with everything, right?
Yeah.
It ties in with everything as far as this is what the earlier people that came to the U.S. said. This is what the native people who've been here in the U.S. say. This is what, it branches all this sort of time and cultures and that sort of thing to the point where, is there something to all this? Like, how can you come over from Europe and talk about the fairy and the fae and the little people and stuff like that and then that whole sort of thing? And then here's native people who say the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, there is a difference between the two as far as, like, let's just say, you know, you come over in 1400, 1600, whatever. Yeah. They've been here forever, and they're saying the same thing. And they're saying it about Europe, and they're saying it about here, and the natives are saying it about everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? So how does that work? I mean, so if you've got legends and lore that's existed on one side of the earth and then legends and lore that exist, you know, on the other side of the earth, it's like, how does that happen, right? It must be something to it. That's all I'm looking at, right?
And I think we talked about this when we were talking about, like, the lady in white urban legends. How, you know, you have Urana, you have the woman in white, you have the woman in white hitchhiker. It's all, but those are kind of more modern, you know?
No,
but
I mean,
they're all similar.
It sort of, okay, so here's what's been bugging me about the whole urban legend thing.
Yeah.
You typically think of urban legends as being more modern.
Yeah.
But most of them have roots that go way, way back. The women in white thing has been around for hundreds of years.
See, I misspoke. I understand it's a lasting legacy of folklore, but...
No, I mean, you didn't... And what I'm saying is that, so when we talk about urban legends, at what point does it become lore or folklore or urban legend when it's sort of the same thing? And what I'm thinking is that, I know you want to cut me off, but let me finish. It becomes a thing when the generation who's never heard of it before hears about it and makes it a thing. This is what happens with, like, in general, right? Your grandparents knew about that kind of stuff, but when you're growing up, you don't really care what your grandparents say or your parents say until you figure it out. And then all of a sudden it becomes a thing. And then it sort of carries on. I think that's how that kind of works.
There are people who go to school for this, and it's like the study of folklore and mythology.
No,
like
okay. Stop being literal, right? What I'm trying to say is that, you know how when you were growing up and your parents would, like, talk about stuff or like stuff and you could give a shit less, right? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden as you got older, you got into it and you have renewed enthusiasm and everything towards it, and it sort of carries the torch, right? I think that's kind of what all this is that it's one thing, and then when you pick it up and become interested in it because it's okay or whatever reason, then all of a sudden it gets resurged, repopularized, right? A whole generation picks it up and runs with it, and that sort of continues the entire thing.
Yes. That's...
I'm not talking about people going, I'm just talking about just everything in general.
Okay.
Like millennials. This is oh man, have you tried coffee that you could just pour over? It's like, yeah, man, it's called cowboy coffee. It's pour over coffee, all that sort of thing. But the only difference is that it gets tweaked a little bit.
Yeah, that's how folklores and legends and myths evolve.
Right. But I do think that there are urban legends that are more modern and new. And, you know, when you compare that to something like, say, you know, I don't know, Lady in White, La Llorona, whatever. That's been around for a long time. It just seems to get tweaked.
Yeah.
So, see, now you've train wrecked me.
No, basically everything you're saying is in the study of folklore, is in the study of mythology. Our problem is because we have many developed cultures and societies. At what point does mythology stop and folklore begin? At what point does folklore end and urban legend start?
1,000 years.
That's tough because unfortunately, we evolve so quickly. I mean, just looking at how technology is pacing us and pacing the way we do storytelling now.
Well, you know that's directly influenced by alien technology. It's reverse engineered.
And the way we share oral history is different. In Appalachia specifically, you would tell stories around the fire or on the porch between family members at family outings or after church. And now we live in a society where you tell stories across TikTok.
Well, usually they're
and the shut-in nature of Appalachia, it's so interesting that we are just now seeing some of those stories around the fire or on the porch being translated to TikTok. So,
well, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
But you could even go back even further than that and say, well, it started showing up on TV.
Yeah.
And it actually started showing up in music first, because if you look at like, June Carter, or I'm not sure the Cashes, man, they were old. Yeah. For the old, it was, remember we watched a documentary on it where they would show up and basically capture these old songs, these hidden songs, right? American music songs, and record them and put them out there. And you had, they call it bluegrass now, but I mean, it was something a little bit different. They call it American music, Americana, whatever you want to call it. But they were bringing the music out of the mountains, and putting it out, and it became a sort of popular trend, and it sort of slowly started dragging, I think, society's views towards Appalachian people into maybe a slightly less negative view. So you would hear, all these songs and stuff, right? And it became this big thing for a while, and part of that is sort of dragging the culture out. But even then, there's been sort of this view towards people in Appalachia, hillbillies, whatever you want to call it, have sort of a negative connotation. And when you have like legends and lore and stories and things like that, they were often kind of looked at as being, whatever, you're just crazy mountain people, you don't know anything. But I think that today things are a lot better in some ways. And I think that people are more open and accepting of like things like paranormal and legends and lore and spooky stuff and all that. And a lot of it is due to social media.
And, and the fact, though, remains, even though it is now more open, and kind of like you were talking about with TV, we are only seeing either condensed versions of folklore and paranormal in our area through the lens of whoever's presenting it to us.
Well, yeah,
so, like, these TikTok videos, we're seeing their experience with the weird in paranormal in Appalachia, whereas we have our own experience.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's just kind of how it is.
Yeah.
But, I think a lot of what's being sort of glossed over is that there's typically two different types of legends and lore that you hear coming out of Appalachia in general. And this is just most everywhere. It's either funny or precautionary or cautionary tale.
Yeah.
But a lot of it was designed to keep kids alive.
And the problem with the funny is that if you break it down further, it's really not funny.
No. Well, it's funny, but there's always a tinge to it of like, hey, it's funny, but you got to be careful.
Yeah.
But this is like with every culture. I mean, like even with natives and stuff like that, stay away from the river. The brownies will get you, or whoever's in the river spirits will get you, because what are you trying to do?
Keep them from drowning.
Keeping your kids away from the water, right?
Yeah.
Don't go out at night. Don't whistle. All this stuff is like designed to keep you safe and keep you close to the fire, keep you, in a protected sort of area versus like, let's wander around the woods and get eaten by something.
And there was even a local one here in Burke County and McDowell County, North Carolina. And they both had these different and more graphic, depending on who told you, stories of a witch up the edge of the mountains going up to Brown Mountain. And the whole thing was like, she'll chase you at night and all this other stuff. But if you think about it, it was such a windy road up there to get up there. It's just a cautionary tale to keep teenagers from driving at night up the mountain. Yeah.
But where it gets weird is when you have full-grown adults that have these weird experiences. Then it's like, you should be cautious or whatever. You're an adult. You're less likely, I think, to get sort of have some of these accidents when you're an adult versus a kid. I don't know. It's because it's always more terrible when it happens to a kid. But so it's just kind of a sort of an amalgamous thing, right? It's hard to wrap your head around some of these things. But some of the ones that have been coming out, like through social media and stuff, like the whole "don't whistle in the woods," "do you hear anything?" "No, you didn't," all that stuff. It's getting to the point where they're blending. Like area doesn't seem to matter anymore. Like when I was growing up and living here, you didn't hear about skinwalkers in North Carolina. They were called something else. And even the Cherokee called them something else. But now that sort of has shifted, like, oh, yeah, anything in the woods that may be a shapeshifter is a skinwalker. And that's not the case.
The Deer Man, he's supposed to be the Midwest.
Right. And same thing with Deer Woman.
Well, Deer Woman did kind of come through this area through some studies and research. It suggests she might be on the outskirts of Appalachia. But I remember clearly Deer Man and Goat Man. They're supposed to be Midwest towards, more westward.
Yeah.
And we're already hearing, like, we'll get reports about Deer Man here. And I'm like, really?
Yeah.
I need you to describe to me exactly what you saw.
And like Goat Man with Goat Man's bridge and stuff like that. So
yeah.
Yeah, it's just kind of, and like Wraith is, you're going to, rake, right?
Which is supposed to be a creepy pasta.
Yeah, it is. It's not even a real thing. But, I mean, how do you describe it and put it in context for it didn't exist, but is there something else in the woods that kind of looks like that? And that's why they're calling it a rake, because a rake, you see what I'm saying? So it sort of becomes all blended to the point where it's like, well, hold on a second. If you go back to the true roots with stuff, it doesn't make sense from a folklore perspective. So then it becomes relegated to, oh, this is just a story, a precautionary tale or whatever, which is what most of these things could be taken as. And where did it lose its sort of basis in like fact?
Yeah.
Like this is how this started and this is what it's grown into. And it's getting even more muddied now, I think, because it's so quick and easy to jump on the internet and spend a minute talking about stuff that you've seen on TV or whatever and blending all your stuff together.
Just read the Reddit title and that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Don't read the whole thread.
Yeah. And so when you look at Faerie and Fae Folk and stuff like that, it becomes kind of one of those things where it's gotten to the point where it's sort of the same thing to where most people don't even talk about it. It's a pretty unpopular subject, I think. When you compare some of the other stuff that's out there that people have been talking about, like UFOs and Bigfoots and aliens and everything else that's involved. But like when you look at like the Fae Folk and the Fairy Folk and some of the legends and lore that go along with it, we're talking about like little people and wee folk and all that sort of thing. There's been a pretty heavy little people or wee people, whatever you want to call them, sort of origin here, where the Cherokee talk about them and have seen them, and there's been other places, and there's places in North Carolina out here towards Appalachian Mountains and stuff like that where it's, I can't say documented, but they found what could be construed as evidence of little people, like tunnels under schools and stuff like that are perfectly made tunnels that are the right size for little people to transit. People talking to little people and Fae Folk.
Like the little tunnels that are like gnome sized.
Yeah, and stuff like that. And so if you go looking for, that kind of thing in North Carolina, you may or may not see stuff. We've talked about this in the past, but I'm kind of getting towards the whole, like, when it comes to like Fae Folk and like things you should and should not do.
Oh, there's a fairy sighting in Chimney Rock, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And okay, so the house that we're in seemed to be at one point, and I don't know whether it's just a noticing that we have since we're kind of interested in stuff like that, or if it's just some weird person who had an eclectic art taste. There was lots of things along the border of this property that kind of goes counter to Faerie and Fae Folk.
Yeah.
Like weird statues and things, or small statuaries where you just like angels and
lawn ornaments and lawn guardians.
Yeah, and ironworks and things like that all around the property.
Yeah.
In places that you'd never see.
Yeah.
And that's something that we noticed, and over time I think some have been removed. But that's kind of a common thing for people that believe in that sort of thing, and the Faerie and the Fae Folk, and trying to keep, sort of have a protected area. And so you may see some of that stuff.
And see, that's where I'm always thrown for a loop, because we have that Fae mythology and folklore here in North Carolina. But then you go to areas where you think, well, if Fae folk exist, they'd probably be in that area. And you find a lot of angel and Christian protection stuff. And I don't know if it's like counterintuitive or if it's their power of belief is what's going to protect. Because I'm used to, fairies, you have this to protect you, have that to protect you, not necessarily like angel statues.
I think it all goes towards the faith and everything else
that
you may have. But, who knows? Like iron is supposed to repel, but.
Which I found. That was
I know.
cool.
That's what I'm saying. So,
yeah.
So anyway, kind of moving back into, we've been kind of rambling a little bit, because this is sort of one of those things where if you're in the area where you live, you may notice this sort of thing, or may have seen it but not paid attention to it. So it goes back to grandma, or a couple of great grandmas or whatever, and they have this sort of, protection sort of thing. And where did they get their influence for protection when it comes to like, watch out for fairies and fae and the tricksters and stuff like that? And is a lot of that just put in place because of things that happen? Because if you live in the mountains by yourself, there's hardships, man. I mean, there's hardships and death and sickness and everything else that goes along with it. And it creates a lot of these superstitions and things. Mm-hmm. And then that sort of leads to different things to maybe help protect you, like, let's put a broom over the door so that way, a trickster, fairy, or whatever element comes in, they have to count. So they have to count the bristles in the broom before they can enter. And it seems like all this is designed to keep people out of your house, out of your living area.
Yeah.
Sprinkle bird seed. Put rice, bird seed, oats out, throw it on your front yard because that way they have to count each grain before they come in.
Yeah.
Leave your untied boots on the front stoop so that way, they can't come in because they have to tie your shoes first. All this weird stuff, right? And it kind of makes you wonder, it's like, okay, so if you have all this stuff going on trying to protect you, even things like with your hair, there's all this sort of like, if you get a haircut, throw it outside so the birds can make a nest or whatever like that. And it also goes back to if you get a haircut and you throw your hair out, they have to count the hair. It's a lot of counting involved for some of these things to kind of keep them out. So I don't know, because it can all have sort of multiple reasons.
Yeah.
Like if you throw the hair out, it also puts your scent around your house. You know what I mean?
Yeah, which would
so you're marking your
against.
property, which again and it's kind of like, okay, what are you actually protecting against? You're protecting against the evilness or the bad juju or whatever the possibility of having some of this stuff come in, or are you doing it naturalistically to keep stuff away, or what's the real reason behind it? And what I found is, in my own mind, it's all of it. It's all mixed in together, and it's better safe than sorry.
I was trying to remember that one thing about changelings, which is mostly Europe.
Yeah.
Though there are some indigenous stories about it where a fairy may swoop in and change out your baby for a changeling.
Right.
And depending on the tradition, the changeling freaks out on you one day and runs away, or it just becomes a little monster or something like that. Well, to protect against it, that's what I was trying to remember. And it's placing garlic and steel in the cradle to protect against theft. Well, steel, it's a metal. Maybe it's protecting against some sort of insects. Garlic will definitely deter insects and some like mice, because that sort of stuff happens.
Yeah, they don't like mint and things like that. There's other versions too, like you put mint and garlic and things.
Yeah.
But let's go back to looking at the changelings in general. All of a sudden, you wake up and your baby's different. It's not your baby anymore.
Yeah.
Sadly, a lot of defects that children have or when they're born or when they're infants don't show up until later. So what happens if you think everything is okay and all of a sudden you wake up and your baby has sort of grown into the defect and now you notice it? Is it still your, it's this terrible stuff.
Or even postpartum depression will do that to you, sadly.
It's where you see things differently. So it's just kind of like it's an all-in-one sort of thing. And I think that's what makes it so interesting. Like, what's the real reason behind it? Or is there a real reason behind it? Or where did the lore actually come from to get to the point where people are just following it because they don't know? Yeah. Like, go back to fairy rings and stuff. If you see a fairy ring, you're supposed to dance in it and make a wish, and that wish will come true.
See, I was never told that one.
It always goes two different ways, because when you look at the fairy and the fae folk, they're not inherently evil and they're not inherently good. So if you're not evil and you're not good, because your experiences may vary.
Yeah.
What do you call it? Trickster.
Huh. See, I was told if you avoid fairy rings, if you do accidentally step in one, you have to walk out backwards and you have to spit outside of it. That was what I was told. Yeah,
and you're also supposed to enter a fairy ring, clockwise.
Oh,
and then leave counterclockwise. It keeps growing. That's part of the thing. So it's sort of
backwards out of
can be regionalistic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, talk about little people and brownies in general, and there's legends and lores and stories of trading things with these little guys or them stealing stuff. And
people I did that
have made
when I was a little
reports
kid.
of seeing seeing like these little people with like different types of like, plastic and cloth made into clothes that are obviously from stuff that's been taken from, let's just say the humans, right?
Yeah. I put a doll in a fairy ring once because I was so excited because I thought I could trade with the fairies.
Mm-hmm. Did the crow get it?
Yeah.
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 And this thing too, they're all shapeshifters and all this crazy stuff. So
a crow half dragged it outside of the fairy ring and it just sat there, got rained on for 2 days.
Or a squirrel. Squirrels are buttholes.
And then, because it was the scented Barbie.
Yeah, they probably didn't like it. So let's talk about 7 different ways to protect yourself from the trickster fairies. Now, as far as fairy protection goes, there's a whole bunch of basically stories, myth, legends, lore, whatever, on how to actually protect yourself from evil fairies. Right? Mm-hmm. So here's 8 ways to do it. So if you're worried about Faerie and Fae Folk and all that stuff, and you can research this all you want, because it can go back a couple hundred years, and there's different types and all sort of stuff. Library is probably a good place to get some of the older books from the 30s that describe some of the fairies and stuff like that. But if you go to otherworldlyoracle.com, here's what they say. Number 1, iron protection from malevolent fairies. So you hang an iron horseshoe above your front door, and it wards off evil fairies. A lot of the stuff that you do to protect yourself is they call it warding, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're hanging an iron horseshoe off your door, or your doorway to keep evil stuff out, what does that turn into? Oh, flip it upside down. It's just for good luck.
Yeah.
Keep the luck in. Well, what happens if you don't have horses? Horses are relatively, domesticated horses, relatively new thing in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much, the idea of iron being an unnatural creation, because you have to make iron. It's not born in the ground. You know what I mean? So, or it might be. I'm not a blacksmith magician. I don't know exactly, but you have to mix things together, make an amalgam of metals.
Yeah.
And iron's supposed to burn, and even it's all in different books. So you hang some iron up. Iron is supposed to protect. People will mark their territories and their lands and their property with iron stakes and things like that, so they could mark out property boundaries.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of weird, right? So you got cast iron and things like that are actually used. And what they say is that this belief could be due to the idea that fairies were originally a small Neolithic people who lived in Ireland and who were driven out of their homes by the Celts, specifically in the Iron Age. Hence the fear of iron and iron weapons. And cast iron in the kitchen protects from trickster fae, from basically spoiling or overturning your food.
Yeah.
And if you wear like an iron troll cross, like the kind that they wear in Sweden, it wards off evil elves, trolls, and the like. Or you can hang iron troll crosses around the home or in the garden. Kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
Another way to protect is with bells or chimes. Like if you hang bells, like the bells are basically there to kind of frighten off evil spirits. And so in medieval Ireland and elsewhere in Europe, specifically the big deep sounding church bells,
yeah,
they would ring those to draw people to the church, and they apply the tradition to basically using the chimes and stuff on your door and your front porch, to kind of keep or clear your space from the spirits. So, and it makes me wonder how much of this is pagan too, saying it's protect against pagans.
I don't know.
Because they wanted to get pagan people in and convert them to Christianity, but at the same time, they wanted to keep other pagan tribes out from attacking and killing.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of a weird time, right? So you can hang up chimes and bells. Same thing with spirit bells. Right? You hang the spirit bells up when the bells ring. Spirit's either coming or going, or it keeps spirit out.
Oh, yeah.
And if you're looking for protection from fairy raids or rings, if you go out walking at night, or during the twilight hours, if you go out on one of the 8 holy days, you're supposed to basically protect yourself from getting caught up in one of the fairy raids or rides or in a fairy ring. And so the old Irish folklore says that you basically, and some of these I don't understand, right? It says that one is to turn their coat inside out to keep from being pixie fed.
Pixie led.
Yeah, pixie led. Oh, I totally misread that, right?
Yeah, wearing your clothes inside out.
You know why, right?
No.
If you wear your clothes inside out, and you think about what they wore back then with coats and pockets on the outside, big pockets, right, to carry stuff. If your coat's inside out, you don't have a pocket for them to slip things into. Because once you've accepted a gift from a fairy or a fae, you can be trapped.
Or if you're traveling a long distance and your pockets are on the inside, then initially robbers and bandits are less likely to find your treasures if they're harder to access.
Yes. Because they won't see them.
However, I will point out this whole wearing your clothes inside out is very missing 411. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of weird.
It is kind of weird. Now, this is the one that I think you should pay attention to. Don't traipse into their territory. The easiest way to prevent getting caught in a fairy ring or a fairy raid or being dragged to the depths of the pond, if there is one, is fairly simple. Stay out of their way, stay out of their territory, and most people can feel when they're teetering closely to the otherworldly or company of fairies. You either hear harp, maybe some flute music, sounds far away but close. You'll see stuff around you sort of shift, maybe. Perspective changes slightly. You'll feel unstable. You know what I mean? Like maybe dizzy. Mm-hmm. And there's sometimes known fairy haunts in certain places throughout the world, and especially those places alone. Sounds like ley lines that intersect, or maybe portals, weird stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
But if you happen to enter their territory unbeknownst to you, tell them you mean no harm and leave promptly.
Okay.
That's kind of nice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to appease the fae, you can leave a pail of fresh milk, butter, or cream outside your front door on the 8 holy days to appease the fae and keep them from wreaking havoc on your garden and home. Leaving the fairy offerings and libations date back hundreds of years, and if you have any Celtic ancestors, you probably have ancestors who partook in this tradition. I know Appalachia did the same thing.
So yeah, I know the bowl of buttermilk. I also know
more milk.
Yeah, which isn't here. Another way to appease them is to acknowledge them verbally or vocally.
Yeah, or leave them gifts.
Yeah. Like so,
things to trade.
Saying things out loud, like especially, let's just say you wander into, a fairy ring. Like you have to acknowledge, oh, I'm in a fairy ring.
Yeah.
Be all loud about it.
That way they know you're talking to them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's sort of a preventative thing, right? Sort of, keep them happy, live in nature together, that sort of thing. Yeah, and it's a preventative method to protect from trickster fairies. Make them happy at the back door so they don't intrude. And fairies are also particularly active in the days leading up to Samhain. Right? How do you say it? Samhain?
I believe it's Samhain.
I'm not a good pronunciator. And during the 12 days of Yule.
Yeah, it's Samhain.
Another way to protect yourself from fairies, and basically we're just going to say evil spirits in general, is a circle of light. So you have to use one's own mind and energy. You have to visualize your meditations, rituals, and spells, and the method of fairy protection should be familiar to you. So you have to visualize that you are protected.
Maybe that's
using your light.
That's where all these yards full of angels come from. The literal interpretation of a circle of light.
Could be.
If I put a bunch of angels around in my yard, I'm surrounded by light.
Well, I mean, if you look at some of the stuff that's out there, right? We have statuary and border, things like that, and you've seen it like in movies and TV and in books where the statues denote what territory you're moving into and what to expect.
Yeah.
If you have a big scary statue or couple surrounding your house, you kind of know, oh, maybe I shouldn't go here. Think about some of the older stuff where they have like people hanging up on spits and pikes and stuff to kind of denote, hey, you're going into an area that, be warned, right? Yeah. So one of the most effective forms of protection against trickster fairies and other spirits in general is to invite your ancestors and gods into your homes. Because once your guides and guardians take up residence in your home, they do most of the work keeping out negative forces like malevolent fairies and the like. So, calling on the ancients. Kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
And you would think with people going out in the woods and taking pictures and looking for stuff like UFOs and Bigfoots and other crazy stuff, why haven't we seen more fairy pictures?
Is it because it's not popular?
It could be. Maybe they're not looking for it. But it also could be that these things are really good at camouflage.
That's true.
And they can influence the mind. I don't know. It's definitely kind of a weird thing. And so we've been talking about like the little people, wee folk. Natives can basically call them brownies. Right?
Yeah.
And we've talked about it in the past. The American, this is an article that I'm not too sure if I like it or not, but basically it says, the American Indians and the Appalachians knew a different little people. The Nanahe, right? Or Nanahe, actually. And they talk about where the Cherokee, Choctaw, Iroquois, and others have different names for it, right?
Yeah.
And it's basically denotes into the people that live everywhere or the people that live forever. They call them the immortals. And it's been documented the world over that sightings of fairy funerals don't happen. Or they happen so that none of them actually will, not all of them are going to live forever, right?
Yeah.
And this person says they had the opportunity to befriend one of the little folk. And said that they were short, stout, had stringy hair with moss pieces in it. And he was aged in years. And he basically said him and his family came over from Ireland, experienced the potato famine, and he'd been there since in the backwoods in Limestone, Tennessee. And I thought this was kind of an interesting thing because it says that these little people came over from Ireland and are living here forever.
Okay.
And I hadn't really ever heard of that before. I'm like, wait, what? That doesn't make sense. So they're saying that. So what drove little people out of Ireland to come here?
Is that just another interpretation of the allegory of driving the snakes out of Ireland?
Or getting rid of the pagans?
Yeah, essentially.
Because the Christianity's coming?
Yeah. So
I'm like, okay, so that's kind of a different thing. I mean, I had heard in books where I read where the elves left, like in Tolkien, right? When he did Lord of the Rings and all that sort of thing. They left and went to a better place because mankind was spreading. But I'd never heard of someone who actually said that they've actually met one.
And see, I keep finding these...
But they make a distinction between this little person and the native version of little people. They're not the same.
Yeah. And I find websites and blogs and random abandoned Reddit threads like this saying this same exact thing. And I'm like, but they don't go back any further. So I'm like, where did somebody come up with this idea or concept, or where does this concept stem from? On top of people coming to America and settling in Appalachia, so did the actual fairies.
Yeah, did they come with them kind of thing? It's sort of weird, right? And so if you look at the Nunahi from Cherokee, they're supposed to be playful yet stern people. And they're a form of spirit people. Small little peoples, right?
Yeah.
And it says they are powerful and benevolent people who are described as being anywhere from 2 feet to 7 feet tall. And the Nunahi is also a term for people that can communicate with them, like healers and medicine people. And, there's lots of stories of little people around here. And I haven't heard really any standout stories from some of the Cherokee people we've talked to who've actually talked about the lore with the little people. But there's been articles written by, like, regular people who happen to own property, and their property allegedly borders the land of the little people, and they were communicating. It's weird, man. It's like,
this site is completely contradictory to what I remember when we did that Bigfoot festival in Cherokee, because that guy talked about, like, the Nunyunhi. I'm probably going to butcher that name a couple more times. They were mischievous. They were tricksters.
Right.
And you had the Yunwe Tassendi, and the Yunwe Tassendi were like guardians and almost warrior, like, like they protected things.
Yeah.
And because the one thing that stuck out was that guy telling me how Catawba Falls in North Carolina was like the start of the border, the start of the Judaculla border. And that those falls were the gateway, and there were Yunwe Tassendi at Catawba Falls to this day, and I was like, that's really interesting, But yeah, this site's completely opposite of what I heard.
Yeah.
So now that's like, okay, now there's 3 different types of little people out
Evidently,
here?
there's supposed to be a bunch.
Yeah.
And, like ones that you're talking about, like they usually show themselves through glimmering sunlight through trees and waters, right? So same little folk, but different tribes. And they're rarely heard, like from now, meaning that they rarely come around, unless petitioned with rich offerings of milk, beadwork, venison, or honey, and they don't come around humans who aren't lost or troubled, or unless the circumstances are dire. Which is kind of saying that, hey, unless things are real bad, you're not going to see them. Like maybe they're there to help, kind of a thing. Like that's a last resort, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're also been believed to live in the high mountains of Appalachia, where barely any timber grew. And at night, you could hear them up there singing, dancing, drumming. Some people would hear the music and try to figure out what direction they would be. And then when they would try to get close to it, the music would shift and come from somewhere else. And one of the Cherokee stories, according to this, basically tells about 4 women who showed up in a town called Notley and danced with the men for hours. Nobody knew that they were Nunnehi women.
Oh.
I thought they were just women from another village like a Cherokee. And as the women were leaving, a group of men were basically standing outside, and they watched the women walk down into an open trail that led to the Notley River. And when they reached the river, they suddenly disappeared. So they were spirits.
Huh.
Yeah. So it's kind of a strange thing, man. I don't know. You can definitely feel it when you go into the woods.
So
I think when you go to a place that you probably shouldn't be, and you're like, all right.
And that's the thing. Like, are we dealing with? I don't know. That's just something for me to figure out. Like, is it? I've always wondered if the big weird out here is by influence of the Appalachian settlers in the area, like some sort of influence that has kind of cast a certain magic or light on the region. Or if it's the thing that's been buried, and that thing being buried being the indigenous culture, which has been wiped away. Or
I think it's just the area
or
in general.
elemental. Is it elemental?
I think these mountains are ancient.
Yeah.
I think whatever's here is here. I think it draws people, and they stay. I mean, there's people that live here and have lived here for generations.
I know, and I don't.
And they don't leave. They don't want to leave. And they're in touch with everything. Boy, they know exactly what's going on.
And I'm sitting here.
And we don't belong. We've gone in the woods out here and we're like, we don't belong here. And it's I think that maybe it's like time served. Like maybe generations got to put in their time before they get accepted to the mountain.
I totally misspoke because I was remembering because I was looking through my Instagram. It wasn't the Yunwei Tasindi the guy was talking about. It was this really weird name, and it was the Yihashuri.
Yeah,
that's the ones that are like the
bad guys,
the not human ones. That's how they're referred to.
Yeah, they're all called spirit people, and they get broken down. But,
yeah,
I don't know, man.
And that's the thing, because like when it goes to the indigenous and what may be here, this whole not humans ones, that was a thing that struck me because that was the name that the Catawba tribe shared out here. And then it kind of bled into, like the Cherokee acknowledged it and the Creek acknowledged it, the not human ones.
Yeah.
And when I hear that, for me, that kind of wipes out Bigfoot or the Forest Brother, that kind of speaks more like that elemental, that high, strange elemental element here in Appalachia.
Scary stuff.
Which has me on Etsy right now looking up iron nail jewelry, Yeah. I'm like, how can I make myself something to protect me from getting kidnapped by the Fae, Because I can't help it. I mean, I was out there and I was taking pictures of some mushrooms and I wandered off because I thought I saw a mushroom, and it turns out it was a mushroom stuck in a tree branch. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. And then I looked in the very expensive mushroom book I got, and I found out squirrels, not fairies, hang up mushrooms to dry so they can eat them later.
What if they're squirrels or fairies?
I know. Well, then I looked below where the mushroom was drying, and that's where I found that really old Coke bottle. That's kind of cool.
Kind of weird.
So
if you're outside in the woods, you can figure out if fairies have been out and about partying, having a good time. Just look for a circle of mushrooms. It's a sign that the fairy have been dancing in a circle, right?
Yeah.
And then once you've found the fairy toadstool circle, right, you need to stand in the middle of it and make any wish and dream will come true. That's what we was talking about earlier. If you happen to have a fire going while you're reading this, take a look at the fire. If any of the logs in the fire are burning with a blue flame, then you're being watched by the good fairies.
That's funny. There's a very similar myth in Hawaiian folklore if the flames change color.
Yep.
Wow.
And at the end of a long day, when it gets dark, make sure you don't throw anything out, like sweepings or water. If you do, you might accidentally hit one of the little people and piss them off. It's disrespectful and really make them angry. If you're in a crowded room and things get quiet, as a morgue, right?
Yeah.
At 20 till or 20 after the hour, you'll be glad to know that even if the party is dying, at least the angels have come in the room. Speaking of little people and spirit folk, be listening to the Mountain Lore podcast. Right? Because this is from mountainlore.net, and this is one of the few places I found that basically had a whole bunch of stuff. Trying to sort of document mountain lore.
Yeah.
And there are books, right? And this is from like Tales of Appalachia and stuff. And there are books and legends and lores and everything else that go along with it. But you would think that there would be just tons of resources on the freaking internet, and there's not.
No.
And it's like, okay, what's going on? It's so hard to kind of get really decent information, even if it's real or not, or whatever it winds up being. It's sort of hard.
And see that
to find, because so much of it has been passed down word of mouth and been convoluted, stuff like, and it even goes into the medicine, right? So you talk about, protecting stuff from fairies and fae, but, if you look at like Appalachian medicine back then, like these granny cures and stuff like that, if you want to cure an earache, just put a couple drops of urine in each ear.
Oh, God.
And that'll help cure your earache. Got diarrhea? Drink blackberry juice.
Or the lichen that I use in my resin Bigfoots. That's supposed to be old man's beard. Mm-hmm. And it has a certain level of toxicity to the liver, but used in small quantities, it was claimed it helped with certain breathing problems that some of us had 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's like...
It's always the dose that makes the poison, right?
Yeah. And then like one of our friends for the podcast... We posted on our TikTok my kind of fairy adventure on TikTok, and the first thing from Grateful Ape Stickers is, oh, that's an Amanita jacksoni mushroom. It's a trap. It's deadly. And I'm like, oh, great. You know?
My goal is to not eat anything out of the woods.
So
if I can help it. It's, I don't know. If you've got cuts and scrapes on the skin, you can basically place a spider web over the area and blow on it.
I'm not doing that.
A lot of people do. That's old school. It works. It basically will help, sort of act as a coagulant.
That's like my big thing right now is the past few days I've been walking through the woods, and despite it raining so much, I keep walking into spider webs. Yep.
There's even something for that, I'm sure. If you walk into a spider web, it means you're going to get a lottery ticket. Pass this along to 5 people, right?
I'm owed a lot of lottery tickets then.
If you want to cure poison oak or poison ivy, here's a old school Appalachian way to do it. You wash with Clorox bleach, then buttermilk. So, and I'm like, that sounds crazy. But chlorine bleach is a disinfectant. So I guess you got to disinfect, and then you put the buttermilk on there to maybe put some oils back in the skin or whatever that you've bleached out. That probably hurts. So if you want to cure menstrual cramps, take your oldest pair of shoes, place them upside down under your bed, and also a potion containing equal parts sourwood honey, raspberry tea or juice, and moonshine. Any clear spirit is basically supposed to help. If you take it one swallowful at a time as needed.
Wait, what was that? I gotta find that.
So basically, take your old pair of shoes, your oldest pair of shoes, place them upside down under your bed, and then make a potion containing equal parts sourwood honey, raspberry tea or juice, and moonshine. And it's supposed to help. So basically, you're making like a toddy.
Well, if you make a raspberry leaf and raspberry extract have been known to help with certain lady problems. So just turning that mixture, that raspberry elixir into a moonshine, you've basically created tincture. So,
well, I don't think you drink tinctures, do you? Tinctures isn't that more like applied like a poultice?
Tinctures are like...
A poultice, what do you call it? Poultice?
No. Well, you can put a tincture in a
It's more like a toddy where you drink it.
Yeah. Tinctures are the things in little squeezies, like what Pepper's oil is in.
Oh, yeah, okay.
That's a tincture. So,
I always thought that was like a... Anyway. So, yeah, but if you take that one swallow full at a time, it'll help. So you're just making your own medicine. It's just basically moonshine and juice.
Yeah. So this website that I'm looking at, this Little Chicago Conjure one, they're starting to wrap up the little people myths across the U.S. They even go so far as the Rocky Mountains and the Choctaw and the Shoshone people and their little people myths. So it's like, again, there was already this established little people folklore here.
Yeah, all across the U.S.
Yeah. So who are we dealing with here?
That's the thing. I don't know. I started looking into it because so I started kind of looking into this a little bit. I've always known a little bit about some of this stuff, right? And I just assumed it was all from Europe, but evidently it's not.
Yeah.
And we were watching, Res Dogs?
Yeah.
And they're in Oklahoma, where it's like filmed. It is in Oklahoma, and the tribes. Anyway, and they mentioned brownies. Stay away from the river, the brownies get you.
Yeah.
You know, and they'll pull you under and all that sort of stuff. So, and we've heard about it in New Mexico, too. Less little people in New Mexico, but still some reference to little people in New Mexico.
It's the Popoli in Lakota. And then I was trying to remember in Oklahoma, if it's like Chickasaw or Choctaw, it'd be some of the same words here on the east.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so if you look at indigenous in general, a lot of things get shared amongst the tribe, and even with the tribes, they're all different cultures and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's just weird. Okay, so if they already had it, I'm kind of lumping them in as a group. They had their own little people lore. Mm-hmm. And then here come the Europeans with their own little people lore. And a lot of the protections and cures and all that stuff are the same. The appeasing, keep them happy, be respectful, living, Mm-hmm. And they are two completely different things, and have been separated by thousands of years. And see, that's where it gets weird. Yeah. Because I always kind of thought that one sort of influenced the other, and that may be true, but it seems like, how can they influence the other if you've got like England and Britain and the Europeans over there, even going into Sweden and Norway and all that stuff? They have all their lore with like Fae folk and little people and everything else.
Yeah.
But it also existed in basically North America at the same time.
Like, how can my friend Sam's family for generations have stories of Lakota little people stealing things that were sweet? But then if you look at European history, how do the Faerie folk and other little wee folk steal sweet things from Europeans?
Same thing, yeah.
So,
and even going into like places like Norway with trolls, it's all so.
In Hawaii, they steal your fish,
Right, and
so
there's little people all over the world. So, in Hawaii's got little people.
Yeah, the mahune.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think, and then you look at like Greenland and Iceland, they have little people
that steal fish.
Yeah. So it's like, and I'm sure Australia has some, and there's little people that live, in the
Indonesian.
I was going to say Indo-Pacific or whatever, but yeah, we're talking about like, everything from the like Filipinos have little people, Indonesians have little people, Malaysians have little people, everywhere has little people. Mm. And so if these little people exist, and they go back throughout time, shouldn't there be more like documented evidence, you would think?
Yeah.
Because when I went looking, I was thinking, this is going to be an easy topic to talk about. I found it interesting because Res Dogs made a reference to it, and I thought back to conversations we've had in the past.
Yeah.
And it's like, no.
So.
And I'm not talking like little people like that are confused with cryptids.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's part of it. So, what was it, the 1800s or early 1900s, that dude who did the fairy book, and it turned out it was a huge hoax that embarrassed everybody? Because he was like...
I thought that was from the 30s.
It might have been from the 30s, like early 1900s. And
yeah,
he did that.
You talking about the guy that had pictures? Or just... Yeah, that was, I'm pretty sure it was... I actually had that book at
maybe that should be a cautionary tale for the cryptid and paranormal community. If you do enough to make the evidence... nobody's going to find the topic interesting.
Well, his thing was he was taking pictures.
Yeah.
And proving the existence of.
Uh-huh.
Because at the time, it was really popular to create these hoaxes, right? Like, that's how Loch Ness Monster was created.
Yeah, but that one was so embarrassing to everybody.
Once they found out. But at the same time, though, you had Loch Ness Monster. That was also supposed to be predicated on a hoax.
I don't know.
With the big footprints. It was supposed to be a hippo foot.
I think
all this crazy stuff, right?
I think that's our cautionary tale.
Yeah, but I mean, is it... Okay, so it's a cautionary tale, yeah. But if
the folklore still exists, though, past that big, drama right there.
Well, how come nobody talks about, like, little people and all this stuff the same way they want to believe that reptilians that live in the center of the earth?
Yeah.
I don't know. You see, it's weird, right?
Yeah.
Because if you think about the stories we've heard where people have gone into the woods and seen something, but they've been with somebody and that same person was with them at the same time and they seen something completely different. Mm-hmm. It's like they were influenced to see whatever they individually was supposed to see.
Yeah.
Who's to say the fairies weren't doing that? Influencing their minds. Because wouldn't that be something if, all this stuff that everybody's talking about with, like, the glimmer man in the woods is like the predator, that, all this crazy stuff in Bigfoot and all this junk was all influenced by, like, the fairies. Like, what if Bigfoot's not even Bigfoot? What if Bigfoot's just part of the little people, but he's just too damn big, right, to hide with these guys?
You're not allowed to live in the Smurf village. You're too big.
What if Sasquatch, Bigfoot, they say he can come and go. Mm-hmm. Like, they'll say, oh, he's behind a tree, he walks past a tree, disappears. What if he's just going back to fairyland? You want to start a fight, that's probably what you should do.
Instead of saying Bigfoot's a ghost, Bigfoot's a fae.
Yeah. He's Fae Folk.
We're going to need... Yeah, I could see that.
And that's kind of where I stopped. This is why this podcast has been sort of rambly and not all over the place. It's because it's kind of like, I can't see a golden thread, or a silver thread to kind of like put everything together, because it's all over the world. It's spread through it. This is such a huge rabbit hole thing with very minimal information. Because it's sort of spread out, and you're like, okay, is this just a retelling of something that's already been heard? Is there any been, when's the last time you've seen anybody reported having a real, I can't say real, let's just say a modern reported encounter with little people, where it's like made the newspaper?
There's that one paranormal caught on camera video that's like years old, and that's about it. And then if you do try to, that's one thing that annoys me is I'll go on YouTube and I'll type something like Fae Folk or Fae evidence, and it's some anecdotal story from somebody who's rambling about some stuff.
Yeah.
Kind
of like we're doing.
Like, yeah. But going into the whole 5G and ninth dimension, that type of...
And see, this isn't even really something we could really go out and kind of research, because allegedly you're only going to see or encounter a fairy or a fae, or let's just say little people, is if you have a need, like you're in trouble, or if they're accepting of you because you're on the same wavelength. There's really sort of specifics to it.
So when I go creeking for my little rock hunting videos, you told me, if something weird happens or I find a cool rock, I need to say thank you very loud.
Well, you just need to acknowledge, yeah.
So the other day when I kept saying thank you all loud and stuff, and I kept finding good rocks, did the Fae Folk think I was in need of good rocks?
I think generally it's just good form.
Okay.
To appreciate whatever you take from nature.
That's true. So
because you got sprites and river spirits and everything else. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I kept finding good rocks the other day.
Because, bringing stuff home from places, it could be good or bad, right?
Yeah.
So it's just kind of one of those things. There's supposed to be ways to make it okay. And does it actually work? Who knows? Yeah. I don't know. So anyway, you've been listening to the CreepGeeks Podcast. It's been sort of a long, rambling, sort of out of sorts podcast, because that's the way it is. It sort of popped up, and I started thinking about stuff, and like, we've had all these mushrooms.
Yeah.
All these Faerie and Fae Folk, and the place where we live has been sort of like, seems like warded. And they could just be boundary markers from an old Christian lady who loved creepy angelic statues. But this place that we're currently in, it does have a little bit of a weird feel to it.
I forgot to tell you and everybody. I found some more.
Ewans? I forgot to tell Ewans.
I forgot to tell y'all. I found 2 more boundary markers.
See?
Way up in the woods.
It's kind of weird, man.
One's like a big giant quartz rock that's about knee high, and the other's about cinder block size. But if you count it, it's like 17 paces. So.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, but I don't know. Are you gonna?
Am I gonna what?
Like the other Appalachia Faerie thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So this was something I was trying to work on for a while in my spare time, which I have a lot of. It seems like I'm sitting there trying to figure stuff out late at night. And I was thinking back to, and this is while I was drinking a Yoo-hoo. Right?
Yeah.
And when I would travel from Virginia Beach into North Carolina to visit family and stuff with my family, there was one of the things that I used to like to get. There was a bunch of different things at the time. We're talking about in the 70s and stuff, so I'm old, right? And one of the drinks I liked was brownie chocolate. It was a brownie chocolate drink, and it was kind of like Yoo-hoo.
And this had to have been very Appalachia because I didn't grow up.
Right. There's
this.
certain things that you, at the time, could only get in certain regional areas, right? Like Cheerwine is a cherry-flavored drink that was, like, really big and still is really big in, like, North Carolina and South Carolina and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But one of them was, like, brownie chocolate. And brownie chocolate was kind of a drink like Yoo-hoo. And they were available in weird places like, not weird places, but they were available in certain areas like Tennessee, Indiana, Florida, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Kentucky, and Mississippi, and Alabama, right? So we're talking about like pretty much kind of like.
With the exception of Indiana.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the South. Yeah.
But it was like Cheerwine, RC Cola, which you can still get and all that stuff. But brownie chocolate was all, kind of down south. And it had a little elf, a little brownie, a little elf on the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
But, little elves and things like that, little people, weren't referred to as brownies here.
Yeah, wasn't that mostly like a Europe?
No.
thing?
It was more like a Southwest kind of native thing.
Really?
Brownies, yeah.
It was? Okay.
At least the way I remember it, But yeah, brownie chocolate, non-alcoholic drink, has a little elf on it. I thought it was delicious. To me, it tasted better, than Yoo-hoo. But that was used in advertising. Appalachian sort of concentrated advertising. So you had like a little elf, like the brownie. There was even, like the moon pies had a different logos.
Oh, no.
And then,
brownie is a strictly Scottish folklore.
Is it?
Yes.
Well, then why do the natives call them brownies?
Also known as the Brunide or the Grugach, which is Gaelic, is a household.
Watch your mouth.
Yeah, which is a household spirit or hobgoblin direct from Scottish folklore that is said to come out at night while the owners of the house are asleep to perform various chores and farming tasks.
Yeah, but I don't think that's referring to the elves.
They are also known to sometimes turn malicious like bogarts. Brownies originated from a domestic tutelary spirits very similar to the lairs of ancient Roman tradition. So, brownie had an equivalent in Welsh, which was the babach, the Manx, which is also Europe, and it's the Faerie.
Right, but they don't look like elves. They look like little mean trolls.
So they're saying that this came from the Scottish, Gaelic, and Welsh people.
Maybe, but the depictions don't look the same, but I don't know.
So,
but yeah, there's a little elf on there on the bottle. It was delicious. We also had things like the moon pies, right? Mountain Dew had a hillbilly on there.
The Cleveland Brown football team used to have a brownie as their logo.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to do a podcast episode on Appalachian influence, right? And things that were only available in Appalachia and, influence from like folklore past. You know what I mean? And I couldn't really find anything. It was terrible. I'm like, what is this? But the brownie chocolate thing was something that I found that was pretty, that's where I started looking to try to see if there was other like sort of folklore inspired advertising that catered to the Appalachian region in general and was made popular that way. Because, if you go back to the American music, the Carters, that's who it was, the Carter family. Anyway, you go back to that sort of, mountain music that sort of influenced and became a trend in the U.S. for a while. That opened up the door for a lot of stuff like that to happen.
Yeah.
Where advertising and stuff can be, kind of get you to, because it's basically Americana, right? Yeah. It was the Carters. I couldn't name like Maybelle Carter and all that. The Carters. So anyway, like bluegrass and mountain music and whatever you want to call it, Appalachian music stuff, it for a period I think it was in the 20s and 30s, it was like super popular. Because all these songs weren't heard. Yeah. If you were in the area or in the region, you heard, but nowhere else. So, I don't know. But anyway, that's all. So if you ever drank brownie chocolate as a drink and you liked it and enjoyed it, let us know.
Apparently it stopped getting sold in 2007.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's no company name. I can't trace it back to anything.
I know, it's hard. I mean, the only thing, if you look for a brownie chocolate drink, you find some information, but if you do an image search, you find some information, based off what it looked like. But I remember I drank those things every chance I got. As soon as we got into North Carolina, two things I drank: Cheerwine and brownie chocolate.
I can't imagine drinking Cheerwine.
What? It's just a cherry drink.
It's so strong.
It's delicious.
There
is nothing that will attract bees or wasps faster than Cheerwine.
Flies.
Yeah. I don't know, man. It's like I've never been stung by a fruit fly. You crack open a Cheerwine in a hot car.
Yeah.
You wait. Yellow Jacket's going, hey, man.
No, like it's a thing where if you pour Cheerwine into a little dish, you'll attract fruit flies. So, yeah.
Fruit flies?
Fruit flies, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, they even tried to, redo the label and stuff, but it had, an elf, the brownie chocolate, and on the bottle cap was like an elf. It almost looked like one of the Seven Dwarves, like Sleepy or, not Sleepy, Happy or Dopey or whatever. It was a little elf, a little hat, a little pointy hat and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yep, brownie chocolate flavored drink. Delicious. So, anyway, I think we're about done. I think we've rambled long enough.
All right.
Talking about stuff.
Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in to our bit of rambling about Appalachian Fae Folk and how to protect yourself. We do have links in the show notes. They range from anywhere from more information about both indigenous and European Fae folklore to how to protect yourself, including fairy stones and starlight crystals. Alternately, you can check out my Etsy shop where I do have a couple of things for Fae folk enthusiasts, like a Fae mushroom bracelet, or we just restocked on our Paranormal Investigator stickers. The link to the Etsy shop is in the show notes again. Thank you to our Patreon supporters and everybody else. Feel free to join us on Patreon or check us out on social media.
Yeah, very much appreciated.
Thanks, guys.
All right, so anyway, see you later. Take it easy. Bicycle.
Bye.